So just a little bit about myself to kind of introduce kind of what my influences are and kind of why this project is shaped the way it is. My very first job almost 20 years ago was actually downtown here as a tech support agent for an ISP in '96. And so at the time, it was like the worst job you could possibly have in the world, where you're dealing with people who like don't know that the modem needs to be connected to the computer in order for it to actually work. But as this kind of blockchain revolution has started to shape up, it's been a very valuable thing for me to look back at, because I had a very personal experience with watching people go through the difficulties of learning how to use this new thing, because they have some sense that this is going to be this revolutionary thing. And I think we've all seen a lot of similarities as Bitcoin people have. After that, I joined the Marine Corps, thinking I was just going to get a free ride for college, and then 9/11 happened and I went to war. And so that then kind of shaped, well, really not necessarily the going to war, but the coming home and finding out that a lot of it was very much based on lies and based on kind of whoever the strongest personality is kind of wins the day, regardless of what the actual truth is. And then I worked for Apple and kind of learned about kind of how a company like that can kind of turn its customers into its biggest promoters and whatnot. Then I went into the media and post-production industry and had a lot of fun doing that. But eventually kind of it started, like, I was in Los Angeles my whole, a long time before that I went to, if you want to be in media, you've got to be in Los Angeles. So I was in Los Angeles just as Los Angeles was no longer doing the job anymore. As kind of the revolution of the internet was really reaching the rest of the world, and it was really inexpensive for someone to get the software that they needed, and kind of the post-production industry spread all over the place. So we moved back down to San Diego and started a business, and we were like making a POS system for the iPad and Square. And that was a really enjoyable experience. We got to work with our hands and build physical things and whatnot. But competing with plastic made out of China, we started looking at, well, how can we lower the cost of this thing? And so we said, well, let's get into payment processing. Maybe we can actually lower the cost of this when we become a payment processor. And learned that that was just an absolute nightmare. But fortunately, it introduced us to Bitcoin, and we said, okay, F that whole direction. We're doing something different. This is absolutely revolutionary. And so we spent a lot of last year just kind of exploring what all the different little subcultures in Bitcoin were, and what mining was, and what trading was, and all the different aspects involved. And about September, October of last year, we really got down to business working on Alexandria. At the time, it was a slightly different project, and it's kind of evolved since then. Initially, it was this archive of history, all the history being shared around the world by social media or through social media. It was a mechanism to store that in some indelible way, so that you can look at it generations from now on what the general culture was saying about this, that, and the other. And at the time we were calling it like Archive Chain or something like that, and someone suggested Alexandria. And it really resonated with us. Because anyone that knows of the ancient library of Alexandria knows generally two things about it. One, that it was this attempt to try to store as much cultural knowledge as possible for the benefit of future generations, as much history, as much kind of recorded knowledge that you could possibly get into one place. The problem was, because it was in one place, the other thing that people know about it is that it was burned to the ground and that was all lost. So we're inspired by that because we want to accomplish the same thing of having this library of history and knowledge and media and culture and everything else, but we want to do it in such a way where it can't be burnt down. So we're trying to one-up it. So when we kind of set off on the path very specifically to go after media distribution, we started looking at what the common problems between all of these are. Problems aren't actually built into them themselves, it's built into the rails that they all run on. Content delivery networks and their traditional payment processes. And the downsides that we get out of that are pretty similar across the board. One, that I say inefficient storage and bandwidth, really that's inefficient in comparison to what we built, so you'll kind of understand by that. Usually it means that if something is free via Hulu or Soundcloud, YouTube or SoundCloud, it means it's ad-supported, which kind of reduces the experience, the quality of the experience, and also oftentimes it actually means that someone can't monetize because they're not comfortable letting Google decide what ad is going to be on their video. It might actually advertise for their competitor, it might advertise for something that they don't actually kind of personally agree with, etc. But also the actual payments from ad monetization are really quite pathetic. And you can see that most people really dislike being forced ads, as the fact that on desktop there's 200 million people that are running ad block software, very openly voting that, hey, this is not the way we want to do this. Especially in the music biz and also on kind of the YouTube side, a lot of artists are complaining that they're not actually getting fairly compensated. Obviously, we all know that there's a few YouTube stars that are making a ton of money, but that's a very, very slim portion of YouTubers. Most of them are barely getting by. So they have to turn to outside sources to actually monetize their content more effectively. And then oftentimes with this content we run into buffering issues, like when a new season of Netflix comes out. At this point they've kind of figured it out. The only way that they were able to prevent people from running into kind of stuttery playback and buffering issues is that they spend a great deal of money scaling their CDN up for their release of season. The challenge to that is that it's reactive scaling. It means that they have to know how much demand there's going to be and then pay for that amount of bandwidth available. And if they overguess, then they're wasting money. If they go too low, then people are going to have a really poor experience and they're going to tweet about it. And Netflix is going to suffer as a result. And then all of them, obviously, because they're centralized and they run through DNS and HTTP, they're DDoS vulnerable. So what we've done is we've invented basically, we like to use the term protocol. It's not a protocol, certainly. It's our intent to eventually make it one. But a mechanism that combines two different networks and kind of a method of organization, a decentralized organization, to create the same experience that customers are looking for, but do so in a totally decentralized way. So it combines blockchain technology. We use it as our library index, and then obviously as payment processing. Peer-to-peer file sharing, the most common of these that most people know is BitTorrent, of course. This is a piece of software that's inspired by BitTorrent, but it's actually kind of BitTorrent on steroids called IPFS, which stands for the Interplanetary File System. And then kind of a mechanism where the various incentives involved all kind of relate to one another so that the system can kind of scale itself. So let's break those down into individuals. So looking at the difference between the way a CDN and traditional payment processing handles their job on the kind of iTunes, Spotify, Netflix model, we've got something where it's very censorable, i.e. Entire portions of the planet can actually be prevented from being able to see some videos and stuff like that. There's a great example of that last year in Turkey, where the Turkish government just decided, you know what, no one gets access to YouTube because we're afraid of a particular piece of content in YouTube. Obviously, the Great Firewall of China is a great example of this. Also, oftentimes when you're watching something for free, not only are you paying with looking at ads, but you're also paying with your own data. They're able to track what you're watching and what you're doing with it. If you buy a book off of Amazon, they know exactly what page you're on and how long you spent on that page, etc. The transaction fees, while in the West we don't consider them very high, we all kind of know this from Bitcoin, in reality they are quite a bit higher than they necessarily need to be. And the actual content in their libraries are alterable. Versus the way that we're doing it, you're able to do it censorship-free, you're able to browse and search and do things privately. Obviously, your micropayments are completely frictionless, so they can be extremely low cost. And the actual content in the library is not alterable by some malicious attack. It's alterable by someone adding more content to it. You can't remove something from it, and you can't alter something that's already there. The second piece of this is how we do our file storage and distribution. And this is actually, this chart is true for any DHT. By DHT, I mean a distributed hash table. And again, the most common example of that is BitTorrent. And basically, I love this chart because it just shows why there's so much more efficiency in a decentralized system. When you're getting a piece of content over HTTP, you're getting it from a specific point. Now that might be distributed servers. In the case of Netflix, what they were actually doing is they were saying, certain cities are only going to get access to our content if an ISP in that city has chosen to localize our data inside their data center. That way, the distance between the data itself and the end user is a lot lower, and that might help a little bit. But every single bit of data that needs to go to someone's computer is coming from one single source. one source or another source, but it's all coming from one source. Whereas in the case of a DHT, every single individual who is starting or has completed downloading a file is able to share all of the pieces of that file. So with the old way, with HTTP, you're actually penalized for popularity. You have to spend more on your storage and distribution if your content is especially popular. And if it's too popular, you're not spending enough on having enough bandwidth available to people, you start getting stuttery playback. So what's funny about this is that they have figured out how to kind of blame the customer and say, oh, your internet speed isn't fast enough. Like literally how many times I hear a week an ad from Cox trying to tell me that in order to like upload photos fast enough and watch movies, I need to have 50 megabit or 60 megabit or 70 megabit. But the reality is, the vast majority of the time, if you're getting stuttery playback of video, it's because the actual server that's serving it up to you is getting too bogged down by how much content it's being asked to deliver, not because your internet speed is the actual bottleneck. So in this case, because more people getting the file means more people providing the file, the more popularity there is, the more available a piece of content is. Within our mechanism, this is monetized in such a way where someone can actually make money for sharing something, which actually reduces your costs just dramatically through the floor. And I'll get to kind of what it costs and everything. But that only applies when something isn't in and of itself popular. If you've got a very popular artist or a particular piece of content or a cat video that is fantastically popular at this moment, it will distribute itself very widely for free without any actual cost. And then the last piece of the pie is this kind of sustainable self-scaling ecosystem, where basically what we did is we sat down and we figured out what are all of the different server-side components that are required in order for iTunes or Netflix or Spotify or YouTube to work. And then we said, let's create a user job that can be provided by someone in this ecosystem for pay. And the natural result of that, fortunately, is the fact that every piece of the system, the security, the payments, the distribution, the file storage, etc., are all being done by a bunch of individuals who are individually seeking to do it as efficiently as possible. So the whole system is removing waste as effectively as it can. Whereas if you look at the alternative of a CDN, you know your overall cost for doing this one thing, and you might be able to upgrade some of your machines to get a little bit more efficiency. But when you're getting down to the individual, like per gigabyte cost or per hash cost, in this kind of a system where it's provided by a whole bunch of people that are getting paid the same rates, it's incumbent on all of them to make sure that they're doing it for as much efficiency as they can for their own good. So they're all individually incentivized to increase efficiency. So why now? A lot of it has to do with just how openly artists are really complaining about this. Spotify is getting more and more popular, and streaming content is getting more and more popular. More and more people are using it. End users love the experience of using Spotify, especially when they can do it for free. But the flip side to that is that as Spotify is growing, their payments per play is actually going down successfully, month over month. And so artists are really complaining about this. A lot of artists have actually pulled their catalogs and said this just isn't working, it's making people feel like the price of content is zero, and that's not cool. And the second, I mean, the greatest example of this is the Pharrell Williams one. Everyone's heard the song Happy, I'm sure. It's streamed 43 million times on Pandora. The headline says he made $3,000. In truth, there was two different costs there involved. He made about $25,000 or $26,000. But seriously, $25,000, $26,000 for one of the most popular songs of the year, streamed 43 million times. That's pretty pathetic. And the second half of it is the simple fact that the technology didn't exist to do this before. BitTorrent has existed for about 10 or so years or so you could do the file storage and distribution. You could certainly, and there are examples of that working quite well. Has anyone here heard of Popcorn Time? Yeah. They have about 15 million active daily users. And when I show this to like investors and stuff like that, I show them, I pull it up and I tether to my phone so I don't like freaking one out or anything. And I pull up some 1080p movie and it starts right away and they're like, oh my god, this is amazing. And the first question they always ask is, how are they making their money? I said, they're not. They're absolutely not. This is a voluntary effort just because these particular people have their own kind of psychological problems with IP and copyright and whatnot. And then when it dawns on them that they're able to support 15 million customers, 15 million active users every day at no cost whatsoever, they're like, oh my god, I get why this is so much more efficient. So yes, the core concept of a of kind of BitTorrent has existed, but you needed to be able to monetize it. So the combination of BitTorrent and really what it evolved into with IPFS and Bitcoin finally makes this possible. So kind of the market size of what we're looking at, we're certainly not kind of considering Internet Explorer, Internet Archive, and Wikipedia as a competitor. In fact, they very much want to support us. We've met with the Internet Archive a number of times. They want to give us hard drive space. They were inspired by the Library of Alexandria themselves. It just kind of shows how many people kind of get excited about something just because of kind of truth of information. And then how many people are interested in free streaming media, and then how many people love the concept of paid media when it's professional, high-quality stuff and easily available to you. Now, our user acquisition strategy. The biggest of it is just that we give users the same experience that they're used to with Netflix or iTunes or Spotify or whatever, but better, faster, and cheaper. We partner with Coinbase and ChangeTip and all the various other wallets that do fiat in, so that if they choose to, they can go ahead and charge themselves $10 a month or $1 a month or whatever the heck they want to, and they're just buying tokens. Those tokens just sit locally on their computer, and then as they use the library, as they consume content, if they need to spend 1 penny to listen to a song, or they need to spend 3 cents to watch a big video, or they need to leave a comment or something like that, that use meters out from their wallet, right? So as far as they can see, it feels just like the same concept of you have a $10 monthly subscription to X service or Y service, and otherwise everything feels the same, except you never have to go with that. Secondarily, the simple fact that the relationship is really directly between the artist and the audience. We're trying to kind of make an analogy from kind of the beginnings of the web, in that anyone can publish a website, anyone can consume a website without having to ask anyone else for permission, because it's built on an open standard. The way that the relationship between us and the artists, whether it be YouTubers or whether it be musicians or whatever else, has traditionally always had to go through some tech company. And we've always had to get permission from the tech company to get the content on there. We have to follow their rules as far as how much they want to charge for every individual thing and how much they want to split that payment out for the artists. What we're trying to do is create a system in which every artist can put their own content out themselves and be individually responsible for what the pricing of it is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the end users are only respecting that relationship, and they're sending their payments directly to the artists. And then we're able to actually have a free tier. Now, some people kind of get stuck on the fact that it's a free tier. It's not really a free tier. They're still spending money, but we give them the ability to generate money for themselves by turning over their hard drive space. If they've got an extra terabyte available on their hard drive, they can earn $5 a month from this. Well, it just so happens that $5 a month is kind of the sweet spot for music consumption. If you actually look at, Spotify has about 60 million users, 25% of which are paying for it, paying $10 a month, 75% of which are not paying for it. They're paying for it by watching ads. And the monetization of those ads turns into about $2 and change per user. So the average between all their 60 million customers is about $4 and change. It's how much each customer is putting into the system to consume content. There's actually been a study by something called the Open Music Project that was trying to figure out, at least in America and in the West, what is the sweet spot for media consumption? And they actually pointed to $5 a month is what most people want to spend. And that's why some people are willing to spend, no one is actually pricing their service at $5 a month. But with Spotify, we find something where you're either kind of putting up with ads and you're generating a little less than that, or you're actually spending out of pocket and you're doing more than that. So in our case, we just kind of suggest once it's all very difficult because it's going to have to scale as there's an amount of content available. But if you assume that a song is worth about a penny or so, we all listen to an average of about 350, 400 or so songs per month on Spotify. So if you're spending 1 cent per and you listen to 400 songs, you're going to spend $4 a month. So you can either attach your credit card for $4 a month, or you can put up 800 gigabytes of hard drive space and you'll earn that in a month. So it works out to be a free tier where you don't have to actually spend anything out of pocket, but you are actually generating resources for the overall system, and you're getting rewarded for that you then turn back into a payment for the artist. Our content acquisition strategy, we think that artists are going to resonate a lot more with that same concept. The fact that this is very much of a relationship this is a business relationship between artists and their audiences, and they love connecting with their audiences. And instead of having to go through some tech company, they're able to actually form a direct relationship. It's pretty fantastic. They stay completely in control of whether their stuff is published, what the price of it is. It's entirely up to them to say it's 2 cents per play and $1 to download, or you can only download or buy, you can only buy this, there is no per play. All of those options are entirely up to them. And they're able to kind of learn from the market that is their audience what the right price for a piece of content is. And then this is a pretty big one, we think. We're giving 15% of Alexandria's ownership to those artists who put their content up in the first 18 months. So we divide that out by week, and when we get started, the say 5 artists that put their content in the first week divide up a little portion, and in the last week, say 1,000 artists divide up that same portion. So there's a lot more incentive to be in early, which really helps us to solve the chicken and the egg problem, where the way that Spotify and iTunes and everything solve that problem is they just have 5 contracts with 5 labels, and they get 30 million pieces of content as a result. Our go-to-market strategy is really going after those free pieces of content initially, like YouTube and Soundcloud, and then starting to turn those statistics around and start meeting with the labels and saying, yes, an individual artist would get paid a heck of a lot more if they didn't have a contract with a music label, but the reality is that most artists do have contracts with music labels. However, this system benefits labels just as much as it benefits an individual artist versus Spotify and iTunes and Netflix. And we've got these little sheets where we kind of came up with like a sample price, actually pass it around, kind of a sample price for each piece of content where it lies right in the middle in such a way where the end user is spending less per month and the artist is getting paid more per month. So there are those sweet spots for every different piece of content where both sides can benefit, which is pretty fantastic. And it just kind of demonstrates how much waste there is in the system that can be removed by doing it in an entirely centralized way. Now, piracy. This is a permissionless publishing thing, so we're definitely going to run the risk of people trying to use it for piracy. So we needed to do a lot of research about piracy and why people pirate and what would get people to stop pirating. I don't have any ideological problem against piracy. Where I'm coming from is when we're trying to give an alternative that allows artists to get the monetization that they're asking for respected by the crowd, we want to make sure that's respected as well as possible and that it's not undermined by something else. And what we found was we don't really think that this is much of a risk because the reality is the people who pirate actually spend more on online content every month than the people who don't pirate. The people who pirate have money. It's not that they have some ideological problem with paying for content, it's the fact that the content they're looking for isn't available. It's the fact that Australia is actually one of kind of the biggest hotbeds of piracy activity in the world, and Australians are like kind of open about it and kind of proud about it. So there's been a lot of surveys to try to figure out why do people do this and what would get them to stop doing this. And they asked, what if we like slowed down your internet speed? The majority said no, that wouldn't get me to stop. What if we started sending you fines? The majority said no, that wouldn't get me to stop. 70% said yes, they would stop if the content they're looking for was available, and they would be happy to pay for it if it was. So this is especially the case in Australia, where they watch a lot of Western television shows 6 months later, because the way the networks design their whole schedule is they think a certain type of content should be played when it's sunny out in the summer. So if that airs here in the summer, well, it's the winter in Australia, so you've got to wait 6 months. The problem is people talk about these things on social media. So if you're a fan of a television show, how are you going to avoid all of the various spoilers that are going to happen through your entire season of a show? And so they're like, this is really messed up. And really what you can kind of see from those surveys is that the people who pirate have simply formed the concept that once something has been put out in the world, it's available to them. They should be able to find it somewhere in the world. And for the most part, once something has been published on the internet, especially when it's not a monetized thing, when it's just like a PDF with a research paper or something like that, once it's out there, it's findable. Anyone can get it. You Google it, you can find it. However, they're trying to put all these restrictions in order to kind of monetize according to the mechanisms that they've done so in the past, through broadcast television and all this other various BS. But because that content isn't available through a legal means that you're willing to pay for, or you're able to pay for, instead people just say, look, it's super easy for me to use Popcorn Time. It used to be a little bit more difficult. It used to be that you had to use a torrent program and then download it and manage the file, and then you had to like have a different media player and stuff like that. Popcorn Time has been out for about a year now, And it's just gotten into a point where it's no longer a burden. You don't need to kind of know much of anything. It looks just like Netflix. You browse, you find the thing you want, you hit go, and it starts playing. And people just don't really care about the fact that they're breaking the law because they're openly saying, I would pay for this. The fact that I'm not paying for this is your fault because you're saying that I can't have it. It's the same thing with feature films. They come out in the theaters and a whole bunch of us, I'm sure, would be quite happy to sit on our couch and spend 20 bucks to watch that movie rather than go compete with teenagers at the mall, right? I was a teenager at the mall. I was fine doing it at that time. I no longer do that anymore. It's not fun for me anymore. I have a good high-speed internet connection. I have a big screen TV. I have a surround sound system. I should be able to get this content, and I'm willing to pay for it. But these kind of old incumbent systems kind of feel like, oh no, we need to have protections for when this is available to you and whatnot. So what we're deriving from this is simply by making the content available, and especially by making it available at a reasonable price. I think personally that iTunes pricing on TV shows is astronomical and ridiculous. It's way too freaking high. And I also kind of think that part of the reason why they've done so is because of the cost of credit card processing. When it comes to buying songs on iTunes, you're likely to buy 2, 3, 4 songs in a day, and then if you ever notice, you only get that receipt at the end of the day when they process 3 or 4 songs all at once. So the tiny little credit card payment out of $4 is reasonable. Out of $1, it's a little bit too much of a chunk. So rather than giving us television shows at $1 where they'd be kind of eating a little bit on the credit card, they say, we'll do it for $2 or $3 because they can't get it anywhere else. Well, the reality is they can get it somewhere else. They go to Popcorn Time instead. So our kind of pitch is, hey, make the content available under your own rules, how much you want to monetize it. Hey, jack the price up on opening weekend and see if the audience responds. They might be perfectly happy to spend 25 bucks to watch a new release movie because they're getting the advantage of being able to do so sitting on the couch and drinking a beer. But all that said, we still need to build some anti-piracy measures into the system itself so that what we built is not easy to be used by pirates to share stuff that doesn't belong to them. So the code is actually designed in such a way where the types of content that are often pirated, movies, shows, and music, you actually have to provide a little bit of authorization or verification of who you are, the fact that you are related to this piece of media through some public database. Like the example is with IMDb. We have 2 different types of media, with video and movies, and the distinction between them is if it's a movie, it should be in the Internet Movie Database. The Internet Movie Database is a curated list where anyone can suggest an edit, but the higher profile the movie is, the more people are looking at whether that's a valid edit or not, and the history of the person that made the suggestion is. So it's very difficult to gain. But what we do is we then say, okay, if you're trying to publish a movie, you need to give us the IMDb ID. And then you need to tweet about it. You need to be someone that's in the credits for that movie, and you need to tweet, I authorize this to be shared. And then, so they need to do that before they're allowed to publish it through our front end. And then once they've done so, it's published. Now someone comes along and tries to see that piece of media, it's going to ask for that same chain of authorization. It's going to look and see, does that tweet still exist? Is the person's name still in IMDb? So even if they did game the system by inserting their name into the credits on a movie, as soon as that's discovered, it can be changed. And so the authorization is only kind of at the time that it's asked for. The simple fact that because of the enormous efficiency built into the system, the cost of distribution is so much lower, and the cost of payments is so much lower that you can actually charge 1 cent to play something, or $1 to play a movie or something like that. So it kind of reduces the need to do so in the first place. And then we actually also built it in such a way, or we're building it in such a way, where users have incentive to share Alexandria content instead of pirating some other version of content, where, similar to Amazon's affiliate program, if a publisher decides that they want to pay a promoter fee to other people to share their content, they can do so. And then they just drop an embeddable code block of that piece of content onto their blog, or their Twitter, or their Facebook, or even their own custom app. And it comes along with not just the content streaming, but also the payment rails, the payment preferences from the end user. And in this case, if the promoter shared it, the promoter gets that little cut whenever a payment actually happens. So there's actually incentive for the crowd to follow the rules as well. Okay, let me show you a little demo. So we designed it in such a way where there's a wide variety of different types of media that can be shared, where this kind of core front end is for absolutely everything. And because the mechanics of it are all happening in the back end, and the front end is just HTML and JavaScript, you can have custom front ends that are more niche to each particular purpose. You can have a music player that only plays Alexandria content. You can have a movies player that only does, or someone can choose to use the Everything app that gives access to all of it. So what we can do with it is stuff like, right now there's the example of, I guess we don't have audio with the HDMI. But title is their whole value play that they're trying to suggest makes it worth switching over to title is the fact that they've got, quote, lossless FLAC files. Well, the truth is, which is great, because there's actually quite a bit of a demand for this right now. Back when we kind of made the transition from records to CDs, the audio files were telling us, no, this is terrible, this is super low quality, you can really hear it, and the rest of us were like, I can't hear this at all. Well, the difference was there, was just that they had much more expensive audio equipment to hear it, and the rest of us are just listening to consumer stuff. Now, consumer stuff is actually high fidelity. You can buy some Beats by Dre, and they're actually high fidelity audio. So the record is actually making a resurgence. There is an uptick in record sales because people really do want that lossless, high quality audio. The other thing that you can actually see this in is in the Pirate Bay itself. Some of the most popular albums that are being downloaded. Since Spotify came along, it sucked away a lot of the need, which goes back to demonstrating my point that it's really availability that really matters. It sucked away a lot of the need for people to download AACs and MP3s. What we're finding a lot is FLAC lossless versions of stuff because no one is selling a FLAC lossless version. Because the cost to distribute just an MP3 or an AAC is so high that imagine something 10 times the file size, how much worse would that be? And you can actually see that these costs are actually quite a problem for these companies. Spotify is not profitable yet. They've been around for 7 years, they're doing an enormous amount of money, and they're not profitable yet. Same thing with YouTube, they do $5 billion a year and they're not profitable yet. The majority of their costs are in bandwidth agreements and storage. So this is an example of 320-bit MP3. You can see just how quickly that just jumped right out. We've also done FLAC successfully. This actually version of the front end doesn't have a codec built in, so we can't show FLAC. But whatever I was going with the title thing is that FLAC is a variable bitrate encoding, so you can call a file FLAC, and there's a big range of whether it's actually lossless or whether it's not. And what they're sharing really isn't lossless. It's a very low quality file. They're able to get away with calling it that because it's FLAC. In our case, like what we're talking about is 1.5 megabit is what they're sharing, and it's kind of decent but not that great. We can do 5 or 7 or 8 megabit, which is what most of the audio files suggest is the best way to listen to a FLAC file. We can also do, so this 4K doesn't play very smoothly on your computer just because it's too high of a data rate to actually process to unencrypt it. But this is 8 megabit per second 4K streaming video. We can definitely do just standard HD. Let's see, here's a feature. So we can easily do 720p and 1080p. We could, like, we've been trying to figure out what the theoretical limit on this, and like there are ways to encode 4K video that aren't as processor intensive, so it wouldn't have been as stuttery as mine was there. They're like 15, 20, 30 megabit. This is entirely feasible to distribute over the system. So really, there's no, like the theoretical limit on what your the data rate that you can serve up very quickly becomes limited by what someone's actual download speed is. They've got a 25 or a 30 or a 50 megabit download speed, and on the other side, you've got a bunch of end users that are seeding it that all have 3, 4, 5 megabit upload, and you've got 10 of those. You could actually max out your 30 megabit download. So theoretically, and if you need to go higher than that, you can spend a little bit more. You can have a few more seeders that have a little bit more bandwidth available. So theoretically, you can go as high as you need. The cost to do so is entirely market determined. So we have one group of users who are providing their storage space, and they're renting it out per gigabyte per some period of time, a year, a day, a week, a month, or whatever. And so it's going to be entirely up to the market to decide what the price of that is. I'm estimating that it's going to be somewhere around the cost of owning a desktop hard drive plus the cost of electricity a desktop hard drive. And that's about 5 or 6 cents per gigabyte per year. So they could actually sell that at, say, 20% margin for 7 or 8 cents per gigabyte per year. So That's how much the individual end user is earning. And on the flip side of that, someone who has to get a file stored, they want to make sure they've got, say, 10 users or so providing that seeding. So it's going to cost them about 80 or 90 cents per gigabyte per year to make sure that their content is enormously available. And if more people start trying to grab this content, if it suddenly spikes in popularity, they don't need to spend that money anymore. As long as there's 10 or 20 people that have the file and are seeding it, you no longer have to spend it at all. So your own popularity starts reducing your own cost. It's pretty fantastic. But obviously we can do other file types as well, like downloadable stuff. Got a little 3D file. We can do recipes, we can do anything. And the reason that we wanted to kind of open this up to any content type is that, yes, this is our front end that we will be pushing to anyone that will have all of its discovery mechanisms that kind of say, if you enjoy this artist, then you'll also enjoy this artist, things like that. But also, we're really designing this to be replacement rails for anyone's CDN needs. So if a recipe website needs to host all of the various storage to their recipes, they can adopt our rails to do so. If title is really struggling right now, they're trying to figure out, their whole pitch is they're all about rewarding artists and they're all about super high quality audio and stuff like that. However, they have to charge people an enormous amount of money to give not really actually super high quality audio. And when they say that it's like owned by the artists, really all they mean is that there's 9 millionaires and billionaires that own the whole thing. So their rhetoric very much matches what we can actually deliver, but not what they can deliver. So, you know, if we can start to kind of get the traction that is necessary to get a little bit of specific details that we can show to them, we can say, hey, replace your rails and maybe you can actually give people what you're saying you're giving them, where they're getting much lower cost to participate in this thing, where the artists are actually getting paid significantly more than they would otherwise, and you can actually give lossless quality audio. Oh, and then the other thing is that we can do things like, this is a pay what you want wall, where the artist, all the other examples that I showed you are not forced monetization. They all kind of said it's, you know, the example of the cat video where you're not going to force someone to pay any money to watch your cat video. But if it's a particularly charming cat video, you want to have your address on it so that they can tip you if they do like it. However, in the case of kind of professional music and stuff like that, a lot of artists are going to say you have to pay me something in order to get this thing. They can charge very, very little, but they want to charge something. So this is what that would look like if someone doesn't have that subscription. So in this case, they're paying individually with Bitcoin and they can choose every single time whether they want to make this payment or not. If they've got it set up in such a way where they've got this $10 a month coming in through their credit card, then they never have to see these. It just automatically pays it for them. You have a little warning up in the corner saying this is going to cost 2 cents. You have 10 cents to cancel if you don't want to, stuff like that. But what we can actually do is we can provide, so I can make a payment right now, or I can say, I want to just, what can I get if I don't make a payment? And so we can have within what we call an artifact, where like one piece of media is available for free, but then the primary piece of media has a cost on it. So great for movies, where you might have some trailers that you're willing to give away completely for free. Or you might want to give your single away for free, but you have to pay to get the entire album and stuff like that. I think that's everything I've got. So what kind of questions? Good?
How are you going to guarantee delivery of all content?
So it's not on us to guarantee delivery, but obviously we want to make sure that people are getting that guarantee of delivery. So initially, we're doing something in kind of the market making realm to make sure that that works. What we're doing is we're saying, publishers, here's your cost to publish. It's astronomically low. It's like a penny or so to publish this into this index, and your content is now available. And then it's up to you to decide do you want to pay for people to see it. So are you willing to pay 80 cents per gigabyte per year to actually see this content? Well, we're actually, so that's going to be primarily on them in kind of the long term. Initially, to kind of kickstart things and get them running, we start as market makers, where we actually buy or rent enough hard drive space from our users that we make sure that every single piece of content in the library has at least 5, 10, maybe 20 seeders. Everything that you've seen so far, we're not monetizing any of this seeding so far, so this is just kind of our alpha testers that are voluntarily seeding. So whenever I check, it looks like we've got about 10 to 15 or so seeders. So this is all without anyone getting paid to provide seeding and just kind of a voluntary effort. And the success of Popcorn Time and BitTorrent kind of demonstrates that that's going to get you a long way. Just the fact that when something is interesting to someone, they're going to download it onto their computer and it's going to be available to see. But adding that financial incentive of here's the cost for you to run your hard drive plus 25%. For all those unused gigabytes on your hard drive, you can monetize those. So by choosing to monetize it, you're providing the seed.
You've described a mechanism that guarantees that people will pay people to provide a hard drive. That doesn't guarantee delivery
Guaranteed delivery of what?
of the media.
Of the
I
content.
pay someone, some Joe Schmo with his hard drive, $1 to host this video. That doesn't mean that his hard drive will be available when a customer asks for it.
Yes, it
months
does.
later.
Yes, it does actually, because I'm not just paying him to have his hard drive turned on, I'm paying him for specifically seeding specific files. And so he's actually, this is a whole mechanism that's a layer on top of FileCoin called, on top of IPFS called FileCoin, where it has a token generated by users generating what's called peace proofs, which is evidence that they have a piece of a file and that they have been sharing it. So it's not proof that they will be in the future. But it's proof that they did in the previous block, and they submit all of those peace proofs to a difficulty engine, and one of them wins the block award. So in order to be eligible for a block award, you need to be seeding files. If you stop doing so, you're no longer eligible for a block award.
You're going to get lots of customer support calls, though, when people find out that someone did host something in the past, and that is attests to the fact that they have hosted it.
Yes, but that doesn't matter. If they
When I
stop,
click play, it didn't show up.
right? If they stop, if I'm paying for 10 seeders and one of them stops, now I've got 9 and a 10th joins. It's all a permissionless thing. They're choosing to put their hard drive space up, and there is an available amount of content for them to seed. And so at any given time, I know that 10 are doing so. Whether it's the same one that was yesterday or not doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So at any given small period of time, I can ensure that at least 10 are. If someone stops, another one will pick up the gap.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I have to say I'm not really sure about whether
Read the FileCoin white paper. It might assuage your concerns. FileCoin.
No, I know I understand, but it's more like a human usage pattern thing. Like I look up a video that I want to watch, someone shares it with me, 3 days later I go to download it, it's not available for some reason. This doesn't happen on Netflix or YouTube or whatever, but it could happen in this scenario.
It could. I mean, it's incumbent on us to make sure that that doesn't happen, which is why we're market making, by paying for all those seeds to be there. And within the mechanism, you know that at any given moment of time, the moment previous to that, someone was seeding this content. Even if they stop, someone else is then going to pick it up and start doing it. So I don't think we're going to actually run into that problem until we stop market making completely, and then we're reliant on the crowd to make sure that they're all paying for their own distribution, but it uses the same mechanism. So they're paying they're paying their reward for someone to be making sure that they're seeding. And it's not like they have a contractual relationship with an individual user. It's the same kind of consensus decentralized mechanism where anyone can permissionlessly choose to do so, and they're only eligible for the reward if they've proven that they've done so. Anyone else? Go ahead.
If I'm supplying files in the system, do I choose which ones I want to host? Or
You can. It's going to be, there's going to be a couple of different options. Like we can do stuff where we can say if you want to subscribe to an artist, that might mean that you get their content right away and you start helping them seed it and you do so voluntarily. It might mean that you set a preference where you say you'll only seed content that is paid, because not all content. Like if something is super popular, Taylor Swift's new album, she doesn't need to pay anyone to seed it because it will seed itself. So the end user can choose to voluntarily seed the content that they've enjoyed, like something that they've watched continue seeding until they quit the app, to voluntarily seed the types of content that are made by particular artists that they want to follow, or only seed the stuff that's getting paid for seeding.
okay, so is there like an autopilot option where
Yes.
it just starts
Yes.
loading?
Yes, the autopilot option is kind of the mining of FileCoin. It's, I'll take any piece proof that's out there, any piece that's out there, and I'll grab it and share it, and by doing so, I am eligible for the block reward, so I don't care what it is. And actually on your computer, when you look at it, you don't know what it is either, because it's just a piece of a block, it's not the actual file itself. The software assembles it into an actual file, but when you dig into your hard drive space, you have no idea what the individual files are.
And is that optimized to share the most popular files if you're on autopilot? It's populating your
It's not optimized, it's not set to do anything yet, but that's what we're going to be kind of figuring out. It's more, I think what we're going to do is we're going to give people the option to share the least popular files. So if something is kind of waning below 10 seeders or whatever, you can volunteer to always be there to pick up that extra seed as needed and stuff like that. But that's going to be, it's going to be a lot of kind of behavior analysis, how people actually, because this is a very new system, a new way of, like, No one's ever been able to monetize their hard drive space before. And a lot of these other things are no one's able to do it before. So we're going to have a lot that we learn from our users and how to give them the experience that they're looking for.
Quick question, Devon. What are the similarities or differences or compare and contrast to projects like storage? Is there any relationship there at all, or straight to reason?
Storage is basically just trying to do that one thing, where they're just saying, hey, there's all this available hard drive space out there, we want to monetize that. They're trying to do it in a kind of Dropbox, as the use case being Dropbox, where I have a file that I want to have stored in the cloud, so I'll rely on these 10 users that have an encrypted copy of it and stuff like that. But the underlying technology-wise, it's very similar to FilePoint. So really, it's just a difference of what the use case is. We're trying to use it where you're not necessarily storing a file that belongs to someone personally. You're storing popular content that is necessary for a role. But so I couldn't say what the technological difference between the way that I haven't looked at their stuff in like a month or so, so I couldn't really say. But
So also Bitcoin does have Bitcoin Sync now, which is
BitTorrent Sync, is that what you said? Or
no, they just call it Sync actually. I think they used to call it Torrent Sync and then
Yeah.
BitTorrent Sync.
Yeah, I know it.
And they've gotten rid of all that. It's called Sync now. What's other than first mover advantage? What's to stop them from bolting a payment system onto BitTorrent and recreating what you've got here?
I'm surprised that they haven't tried to do so yet. I would say that the big advantage that this has over theirs is that they're not open source, which shocked me when I learned that. But the fact that they got some VC investment and then said, well, the only way you can monetize this is if you close source your code so no one can steal it and stuff like that. We're trying to design mechanisms so that this is a safe thing to put out in the world as open source software. And as a result, you can kind of learn that it's not doing this or it is doing that kind of thing. And you can actually know what exactly is going on and not have to trust someone else to do it.
Could you extend your software to be, where it doesn't have a piece of media available on its own index? It can be kind of a meta index of other things that work like it. So you could reach into BitTorrent Sync or into Sync if you want and get it
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And we actually very much intend to kind of loop in additional DHTs as that makes sense if necessary. It kind of obviously complexifies things. And I like the IPFS DHT quite a bit more than BitTorrent. Partially just because I know the team of developers that are working on it, I know the philosophies they're kind of approaching it from. It's already open source software, it's already faster than BitTorrent in our own uses. And the fact that FilePoint is something that's built on top of IPFS and there's no equivalent in BitTorrent. And also just the fact that BitTorrent is the haven of piracy and IPFS is the same advantageous technology without a whole network full of piracy. We actually started this on BitTorrent mainline DHT, and it got the job done. It was kind of effective, but we definitely learned that with fewer seeders, it wasn't as effective. You didn't get as fast response. It was kind of hard to do. It was harder and slower to do those initial seeds when you start with 1 and you're trying to move to 10. It was a lot slower with BitTorrent mainline DHT. So I couldn't say technologically why IPFS is faster, but it's definitely preferred to us.
Do you have any comments on Spotify's recent privacy policy changes?
I think that was just a hubbub about nothing. I think really that they were just trying to say, like, yeah, we need access. He's talking about there was the whole shakeup where their new privacy policy said we need access to your camera and to your contacts and to all this other stuff, and they didn't explain why. And then their CEO just came out and said, big sorry, not because we're doing it, but because we did a bad job of explaining it. We need your camera so that we can do this, that, and the other thing, and none of it is for us to track you and stuff like that. But I mean, you got to take their word for it. You know what I mean? And that's the downside of that. Whereas an open source system, you don't have to take their word for it. You can actually dig into it and understand, or you can defer to someone who can dig into it and understand. So I think a lot of those kind of things, and especially the Snowden leaks and all this other stuff, I really honestly think that's pushing us toward an open source world where millennials are going to stop accepting closed source versions of these things. I actually just learned just about any printer in the freaking world that you print on, there is a little super light yellow text of the IP address that it printed from. Every single domestic, and that's built into the firmware of the printer itself. So like, this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like, this is the result that we've gotten to with closed source. But it's not surprising because there was really no way to monetize open source, and you can't put development into something you can't monetize. And so all the open source projects out there look ugly and don't get very much development. We've designed this whole thing where our monetization is not based on protecting our code base. So we're able to monetize it, we're able to raise investment, and we're okay with other people forking our front end and having a custom front end that's only for music or whatever else. It's really about the Rails working, and why we invent that. Good?
So you might have already answered this, but is the content encrypted when it's on, if someone's hosting on a hard drive?
No, and I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, like, in this world that we're in, there's a lot of push. If you're going to go to open source, you might as well go to encrypted as well. When it comes to kind of public content, like media like this, I don't necessarily see a good reason that it should be. I might be wrong on that. It's entirely possible to do so, and we could actually DRM it as well. We could actually put, never heard of Rivets? So Rivets is trying to do DRM in a peer-to-peer way, where a file is encrypted, and someone does a little smart contract transaction where they pay for that access to the provider of it, and the provider sends an encryption key, but they don't send it open or anything like that. It gets sent directly to the trusted working environment of the chip. So the chip can decode the file itself, and you can watch it, but the person doesn't have access to that private key, so they can't share it with anyone. So that's something we've been talking to Rivets for a while, and the CEO is one of our advisors. So it's definitely something we're going to add as an option for artists so that they can say you can only get this. So, like, as it is, you could pirate content and still download the individual files. If they were to encrypt it with DRM, they could make sure that the only people who are able to decrypt it have paid for it. I think that's kind of just a losing game. I mean, one of the big technical limitations is that Apple won't allow it, so you can't actually run Rivets' technology on anything Apple, which is obviously quite a downside. But honestly, I think that the whole chasing the lock down the file and make sure that it's only in these people's hands, well, it goes against the fact that the internet is the most efficient copy machine in existence. And when we really embrace that, we get that chart I was showing you earlier where it's all upside down.
Well, as a second part of that question then, what sort of protection does the person who's hosting the content have? I mean, there's always a specter of,
Child porn, et cetera, yeah, exactly. That's on us.
Censorship-free.
That's on us.
So now it's...
Right, that's on us to make sure that if there is content in the system, like piracy, like I was talking about earlier, or porn, child porn, murder porn, just kind of craziness, to keep that out of the top front end, where if you go to the website and you browse, you're never going to come across those things, and to keep it out of the auto-seed situation. So I'm quite certain that porn companies are going to get excited about the low cost of this and everything like that and would want to use so. They can go ahead and use the back-end Rails, but we want to do it in such a way where they're getting all their efficiencies and they can benefit however they want to, but that's not bleeding over into the kind of safe for work folks, and especially the people who are just blindly seeding. You certainly, I mean, there's been plenty of examples of this where someone didn't even know they had a piece of content on their computer because of X, Y, or Z, and well, I don't want to go. But you don't want someone to end up in trouble because they were doing something that they didn't even know they were doing in the first place. So it's on us to tag all of those things and make sure that they're categorized as do not see unless it's by someone who knows they are. Okay, Paul?
So what would you guys actually do if you saw content that was kind of...
How do we prevent it from showing up? We publish messages into the blockchain that identify those things as piracy or as porn or whatever. And then the front end actually has rules that just say, don't show piracy, don't show porn, don't show da-da-da-da-da-da. And then what we can do is on most platforms, certainly not iOS, we can actually give people a soft switch in the preferences to kind of open Pandora's box and they can see any content on there. And really that's just to be able to show them that we're not censoring things. We're just saying we're not going to allow piracy to happen, we're not going to allow child porn to happen, stuff like that. So they could kind of open Pandora's box and see everything. They're just kind of warned, this is what you're getting when you do this. But if they just wanted to just kind of dig through the blockchain explorer themselves, they could find that content on their own. But through the front end, we can prevent it from showing up.
Can somebody else access those messages? Like someone else send those messages?
Yeah, it's all public messages on the blockchain. What's that?
So someone else could say this is pirated content even if it's not.
No, our front end is only going to respect the messages that are signed by our admins. So it's kind of like we're in control of our own GitHub and our own app, and thus we can say that the the messages signed by us should be respected by the front end. Good.
How might a scenario be treated in which a content provider was delivering, say, a daily talk show, or say a 24-hour radio network that was popular, and it was delivering blocks at a time, whatever? What would that look like? And in addition, say, because there's a lot of content that maybe is coming out every single time from one provider, etc. I mean, would that be picked up? What would that look like in your scenario? If someone wanted to stream radio on the side.
Well, we're not doing streaming yet. We want to, because there's obviously like things like live streaming events like this are very valuable, but it's certainly not kind of in our target yet. So kind of we'll figure that out once we decide if we want to kind of go after streaming. But really, this is just for hosted files that are already completed and finished and we want to share. So like you could certainly do like after the podcast is over, you put it up, or after the radio show is over, you put it up, which is what most of them do.
Yeah.
They put the file up afterwards.
Have you thought much beyond just that content and serving of executable code, or maybe using that system to power websites?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, websites are super easy. I can actually show you one. This is HTML. So it's quite easy. Any piece of content you want, whether it be an HTML or a PDF or whatever. Executable code kind of gets a little tricky, but yeah, it's entirely possible. It's just someone is permissionlessly putting up an executable piece of code and saying what it is. How do you kind of protect them against viruses and stuff like that? That's on them to figure out the same mechanisms they are now. It's not kind of GitHub in that there's versioning, but there is a mechanism by which we can do so because any publisher can update their content by adding another message to the blockchain that refers to the old one, so it just looks like an update in that case. So yeah, anything, HTML, whatever.
I read somewhere this can archive a Twitter feed.
Yeah, that's actually how we got started was, oh go ahead, I'm sorry.
That was really intriguing to me as I have a Twitter page called On the Blockchain. And the idea of that actually being on the blockchain was.
Yes, I agree. That's actually how we started the project. When I kind of discovered Bitcoin, I had been a Twitter user and then I kind of fell away from Twitter. It wasn't interesting to me anymore. And then I discovered Bitcoin and discovered that this is where the conversation was happening. Everyone was teaching just really brilliant, insight into things and sharing their opinions about this, that, and the other. And so it was very nice to be able to poll the entire world about what they thought about a particular topic at any given time. But the problem was that's not kept anywhere. I can't look for what the total sum of what everyone thought about a subject 6 months ago. And I also can't know whether someone deleted their tweet afterwards, especially this is the case with politicians. They'll say something stupid and then they'll decide to retract it. So when we first got started, before we ever even got into media, we were doing exactly that, where basically the way it works is someone says, I'd like to capture all tweets about the word Bitcoin or about the word Ukraine or about the word Arabits or whatever else. And then they're capturing all that information and embedding it into the blockchain. And then we show that information as a word cloud, where it's like within the search Bitcoin during this particular period of time, what are the most popular words? Then you can hit play on the timeline and you can see, like the example I always gave was Ukraine, where during a certain period of time, you could hit play and you could see like Putin becomes the biggest word, and then sniper becomes the biggest word, and then invasion becomes the biggest word. And you can go, oh, Ukraine is being invaded by Putin. And so that was cool, and everyone really liked that. We showed it off at Inside Bitcoin's in Vegas in October last year. But what we realized was that we were only getting part of the story, because when someone tweets something, oftentimes they're sending a little summary of it and a link to something larger, whether it be a YouTube video or a picture or a meme or whatever else. And we said, we need to be grabbing the entire story. And so we started thinking, but there's no way we want to put videos directly on the blockchain, so we need to be able to have a connection between the permanent record that's put in the blockchain and a reference to a file in a DHT. And so by us kind of starting to look in that direction is how we said, oh wow, this is a media marketplace, we can focus on that. So that code all still exists. It's not in the front end right now, but it very much will be. And so the result of it is actually we can do stuff like, if you have some independent artists, they can put out their own custom app that has all of the content they choose to put in it, with all of the payment rules that they've set, and credit card processing, where they don't have to be responsible for that credit card processing. Someone goes through Coinbase and all of their money and everything like that. And then also that entire social media history of all the things said about that artist. You can have the whole word cloud of all the things said about that artist, and then all the various comments that people are saying within Alexandria about that particular piece of content, etc. And this all just kind of, it all belongs to the user, but they're running it on someone else's rails that costs them nothing. So yeah, we see a lot of value in social media capture and you know, what you can kind of do with that for the sake of history, you know, and revisionist history. I mean, these are things where, like I mentioned earlier, kind of the war I'm learning later on that I went to war for lies, was that this information was available in the world. It was just being repressed. It was being repressed by, you know, powers that be that had a lot to gain out of this thing. And so it was very important to me to kind of say, hey, what can we do to make sure that when information is shared in the world, it's captured and archived in such a way where it can't be edited later on, and people can learn from this afterwards.
The first app should be hosting it for a new our Bitcoin.
Word.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, we're trying to connect with Charles X, whatever his name is, the guy that wants to do the decentralized Reddit, because when you have a decentralized YouTube, you need to have a decentralized Reddit. I agree. We totally agree.
So my question is about subject seeding. If I wanted to run a white label front end and capture maybe the virtual Etsy of women's Pinterest accounts and whatever else you want to aggregate for money, can I also selectively seed with their hard drives so that they're only hosting content within what would touch our front end, or would the women also be maybe
You can't
seeding
choose the
their?
people that are seeding. They have to choose.
So, but they would be able to choose from our content, not the whole platform of yours?
Yes. Yeah, they could like subscribe to you as a publisher and only seed your content.
Got it. Thanks.
How many alpha seeders have currently downloaded the software?
We have about 100 in the Slack channel. I couldn't say how many have downloaded it. And it is actually available on GitHub. You can download it. We don't really say that that's public. We kind of call it private because it's kind of, in order for you to publish, you have to be running like terminal apps and stuff like that and all this other stuff. So we don't want a whole bunch of people to discover this until it's ready for them to do so. But right now, I'd say 100 and change or so.
You want to run the
Sure. Happy to.
Any interesting implications in various economics markets or emerging middle-income countries?
Yeah, we were just talking about that recently, about how you can actually handle that. What you could actually do, and it gets really tricky to enforce it, but like, you know, Botswana is only making $1 a day kind of thing. A penny to play a song is actually a lot higher for them. So what you could do if an artist wants to expand the net to everyone, they can apply variable pricing where the price is dependent on the geolocation of the person that's doing it, and you can kind of apply some graphs where it says this is the scale in Botswana, it's 1% of the West kind of thing, and they just set this is their Western price, or this is their mean price between everyone, and we'll adjust it. The challenge is that it becomes gameable. You know, someone could spoof their geolocation and stuff like that, but people could spoof their geolocation to get iTunes content when they're in China if they wanted to. So I don't know that that's a large enough issue to be a problem, be a stop point. We definitely want to find out. I think there's some other ways that we could go about it, like how you actually identify their locations. If they have a credit card on file, then the billing address of their credit card is their country. But Botswanese don't really have many credit cards on file. So it gets tricky how exactly you enforce it, but it's definitely something we want to try to do.
Cool.
Anyone else? Cool. Thank you all.